warm welcome to you joining this webinar focused on 10 anti-patterns to avoid when moving to the product model. So I've been a coach for more than 10 years, and I've been helping companies transform to what we now call the product model. And some have been successes and some have had lackluster results. And I've been thinking about this topic a lot, right? What makes a transformation successful and what makes a transformation not so successful? And I put together these 10 anti-patterns to help you, everybody in the room, to avoid the mistakes that I've made and together with my clients in their journeys and quests towards moving to the product operating model. So the agenda for today and the purpose, bringing to light these anti-patterns and then learning about, like most importantly, how do we avoid these anti-patterns? Because they suck, right? We want to be successful in our product transformations. And also want you to reflect on your journey. So maybe you're in the beginning of changing towards the product model or in the midst of it. So my hope and ambition with this webinar is to make you more successful. That's the intent. And the agenda, so we'll do, we've been in the check-in part, and then we're going to go to product model in a nutshell, talk about the anti-patterns one by one. So I've sent the video to you, so you have some insights relating to the material already. So I'll try to go deeper in terms of the content that wasn't featured in the video. And then we'll do a summary and Q&A and feedback sessions at the end. How does that sound, party people? Are you strapped in? Ready to go? Yeah? All right, cool. So these are the anti-patterns. The anti-patterns that make transformations lose steam, right? They create friction and all kinds of bad things. And let's start with this, right? Empower teams and the product model in a nutshell. So what is it all about, right? And this is perhaps the old way of working, or maybe the way of working that you work in your organization right now. So you have customers on the left-hand side, and then you have some kind of commercial team. So it could be sales, marketing, customer service, and whatnot. And their job is to understand the customer and to help the customer. And they come up with all kinds of ideas, and they put together business cases and PowerPoint presentations, and they hand those over to product, the PMs and the product owners of the world. And what they do, they take that bigger thing and they distill that into something that's more digestible, that's more straightforward to deliver in terms of technology. And they hand over specifications, epics, user stories, and what have you to delivery teams. And these are teams composed of engineers and testers and so on. And then they deliver technology to the customer. But what's the problem with this model, right? The problem is that it's kind of a whispering game. What happens on the customer side and what gets translated along the way to the delivery teams and the wonderful engineers providing the technology, right? So there are silos between each of these stages. And it's different from company to company. But this is the essence of the traditional way of working, the IT or the project model. You could call it feature teams. And so what's a better alternative, right? And the better alternative is to work more cross-functionally. Having these cross-functional empowered teams that work directly with customers to understand their needs, to experiment, to test and learn, and to make sure that they're creating value for the customer. And these stars right here, what are they? They're objectives or metrics to move. So each team has a clear focus in terms of creating more value in the customer experience. And what's the connection here, right? In traditional organizations, there's a lot of focus on output, right? Epics, user stories, things to do, technology to build. And then, C-suite or leaders in the organization talk a lot about impact. We want to increase revenue by 20% this year. Okay, great. How do we achieve that? And the missing piece is sometimes the outcomes, right? The problems to solve for the customer. What are their pains and needs that are valuable to solve? We can make money if we solve these problems. And in the product model, we want to connect the dots between output, outcome, and impact. And that's easier said than done, right? You know how hard that is, but that's the essence of the product model. And just to talk about different cultures relating to the product model and the project model that we looked at before. So traditionally, you might be in the high alignment, low autonomy type of culture in your organization. And what does the leader do or the boss do in those situations? They state, let's build this because it's the best thing, because I said so, right? So the goal is clear, but it's not very empowering. The teams are frustrated because there's no leeway regarding the technology to build. And then you have low autonomy, low alignment situations. It might be, a startup. So an entrepreneur comes in Monday morning and says, I have a brilliant idea. And then on Tuesday, that same founder comes into the office and says, I have another brilliant idea. And then on Wednesday, they come in and ask teams, why aren't you working? And the team scratch their heads and they're like, on what exactly? And then some organizations, they have high autonomy but low alignment. So teams are happy, they can define what to build, but there's a missing link in terms of the bigger picture of what's valuable to the overarching company. So if you knock on a team's door and you ask them, what are you working on? And they say, search. And then you walk 10 meters to the next corridor and you ask another team, what are you working on? And they say, search. And where empowered teams and the product model comes to fruition is where you have high alignment, direction is clear, and high autonomy. So it's up to the teams to define the solutions to build based on the problem to solve. So the problem to solve here is we need to cross the river, right? But it's up to these brilliant teams to figure out how to cross the river in the best way, because there are plenty of options. And it's about unleashing that brain power that I spoke about in the video. So going from a few brains coming up with ideas to unleashing that brain power in the organization. And my colleague Matthias sketched this loop a while back, and I think it's great to kind of visualize what it takes to be a team in the product model. So it's about understanding the problem of the customer, right? Deeply understanding the problem of the customer, to do user research and to look at data and insights and monitor how your features and functions and technology is being used. And then it's about generating solution ideas, how we can help the customer. What can we do? And there are plenty of options to help the customer. But what are the best ideas? We need to test them. We need to validate them. We need to experiment, because some ideas might not work and some will really work and create an outcome for the customer. And then once you have validated your ideas, you want to build and deliver that solution. And you want to build it fast. You don't want to wait 3 months or a year to build that solution. You want to build something in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something like that, so you can get feedback whether that's the right solution or not. Because in discovery, when you're generating solution ideas and validating ideas, you can tackle 80% of the product risks, the risks of building the wrong thing. But when you're building it, and you're in delivery, that's when you really start to learn, right? Code and production. And at the end, when you've built something small, you can confirm whether you've solved that problem for the customer or not. And in the project model, and in the IT model, or feature teams, whatever you want to call it, other people are doing this work, right? Understanding the problem, understanding the data, generating solution ideas, validating the ideas, or maybe even, they might not even validate those ideas, right? And the teams are just focusing on building and delivering the solution. So you want to create a bigger playing field for the teams and empowering them to come up with solutions and to understand the customer and their pain points. So that's the core concept of the product model. And let's switch back to Mentimeter and do an assessment. So in terms of these concepts that I just talked about, where are you? Where's your organization relating to these topics? So I'll go back to Menti. Here. What's your view relating to these statements that you see on the screen, and I'll hide the results. So you join by going to menti.com and using the code 86158767. Okay. So psychological safety is good. Misalignment, perhaps, in terms of product strategy and outcomes. Collaboration, it's all right, between the trios. Tackling product risks. So there's opportunity to improve how you work with product discovery. And then also how you deliver things. You frequently release small, low-risk changes. So improving the feedback loops. And then the last point is the worst one, right? Minimal dependencies and maintain fast continuous flow. So you have some issues relating to dependencies. We'll touch upon that in a sec. All right, great. Let's go back to Myra and turn to the anti-patterns. 10 anti-patterns. And I'm going to go through them really quickly. So strap in and let's go. So the first anti-pattern, giving too much autonomy too soon. So this might be something that a team says, yes, we're empowered, we can do whatever we want. That's a confused team, right? Because empowerment is about alignment as well, right? High alignment, high autonomy. And what happens if you just let these teams come up with their best solution ideas, and there's a missing link between the bigger picture and the smaller picture? You probably experienced this loop of transformation failure. So let's give teams the freedom to innovate. Patience is a virtue, right? Are we there yet? Any updates? Getting anxious. Can they actually do this? Houston, we have a problem. No results. Abort mission. Back to micromanaging. And then, oh crap, micromanagement stifles innovation. And I've seen this loop, unfortunately, twice in the same company. So it's a common trap. And the big question is, how do we avoid this mess? And Jan, my colleague, he says, move yourself from the playing field to the sideline, but not all the way to the spectator seats. So the leaders have stepped too far away from their teams. Teams haven't been transparent with their progress. And there's a missing link between the bigger picture and the smaller picture. And then the coaches, like me, I haven't done my job in terms of increasing the competence in the teams, because that's the key, in my opinion, that in order for you to give empowerment or let teams be autonomous, you need to make sure that they're competent in terms of solving these problems. So it's about assessing their current situation. It's about coaching. It's about staffing the people in the right teams with right cross-functional flavor, and then training them. And then clarity, the direction, the strategic context, and the objectives that the teams have, that you follow up. You have feedback loops within the company as well as outside the company. And creating alignment across teams and across the organization. That's what it's all about. So you can't just give teams autonomy if they're not set up for success. So the question is, how do we set up for success? It's about creating this link between the strategic context, so the overarching direction of the company, down to the product strategy and how the teams are organized, to the objectives. So there's cohesion, there's alignment in terms of how we create value for the customer experience. And that teams are aligned so you don't create that disjointed customer experience. So one part of the organization is doing this and another part of the organization is doing that. That's leadership, right? Making sure that people are going in the right direction. So that's the first anti-pattern. Now let's switch to number 2, focusing on parts rather than the whole. Product is just a black box, said an anonymous stakeholder in some meeting. And you hear the word product operating model or the term product operating model, and you think, it's about product. It's about putting product in the driver's seat. Sure, that's part of the equation, but it's not the whole story. If you just start your transformation in product, others will be left out. So the main thing to keep in mind on how to avoid this trap is to focus less on centricity. Be more inclusive with the stakeholders and the folks surrounding you. And you've probably heard this in some companies. Yeah, we're very good at sales, so we're sales-centric, or we have great customer service, we're service-centric, or our designers are amazing, we're design-led, or marketers they're so good with growth and all that kind of stuff, so we're marketing-led. All of these, aspects have flaws, right? Because it's not about putting the focus on something, it's about doing things together. And the question to think about when you hear service-led or product-led, it's relating to trust. Who is most trusted to make the call on what to build? And it might be sales, but that means that the company is sales-led. Or product, that we're product-led. But if you're thinking about that, you're kind of missing a key piece of the story, because product is an amalgamation of all the different facets of an organization. So it's sales and marketing and tech and design. And what comes out of that in this prism is the user and customer experience. So we're doing this together, regardless of which function you're in your organization. It's about orchestrating change across the entire company. That's what the product model is about. All right, antibody number 3. You ready? Not balancing innovation and business as usual and keeping the lights on work. And a team says, now we finally have time to innovate. We're empowered. We're going to come up with such amazing stuff, which they probably will, right? But they might hit this sad trombone moment. Wow. Because they have support tickets, they have, system upgrades, all kind of stuff that hit them. It's work that's underneath the surface that they haven't thought about. So in some organizations I've worked with, they get all excited about the product model, but then reality hits them. Customer commitments and technology roadmaps of upgrades. So the key aspect of how to avoid this anti-pattern is about surfacing all the kind of work that's happening in the organization. And thinking about the 3 buckets: new value, existing value, protect value. And understanding that teams do a bit of everything, right? In some months, they do a lot of existing value work or addressing tech debt. And it's about understanding which teams have the most opportunity to be pilot teams, which we'll talk about later. And a great technique to kind of surface all of this work is to create a hybrid roadmap featuring both outcomes and outputs, right? So you have objectives at the top that are connected to a product strategy. You have product providing a list of their hypotheses, and then tech talking about their enablers and how they can enable these solutions in the future. And if you read the book, you can get a step-by-step facilitation guide of such a roadmap, of surfacing the work and then finding the teams that have the most opportunity to really work according to the product model. Anti-pattern number 4. And this was an issue, right? When we did the Mentimeter polling, pushing dependencies to the side. You've been there. You've been in those situations where you're excited about something, you created a prototype, and then you want to build it, and then you're like, oh crap, there are so many dependencies with other teams and all kinds of things that will slow us down. You want to avoid those because that could cause your transformation to fail because you're losing momentum, which we'll come to later. So you want to surface dependencies because we're all dependent on each other. Some teams you're more dependent on than others. And the key to faster delivery about increasing the amount of value that you create for customers is tackling dependencies. And how to avoid? It's about understanding what are the different dependencies. These are 4 different buckets of dependencies: missing skills and knowledge, not having the mandate, or architecture, or ways of working. So thinking about those categories. And the first step for a team or team of teams is to visualize the dependencies using smiley faces. It's very simple, right? Which teams do you have, a so-so relationship with? Not, you might be friendly with them, but it's because there might be some issues and friction because you wait on them to create stuff for you. So it's about understanding the system that's outside of your team and how you can attack those in a positive way, and how to tackle those these dependencies to speed up your value delivery. And to pattern number 5, the CTO and CPO have different agendas. So I've been there many times. So product and tech, they're smiling in the meetings and talking about the same things. They're quoting Marty Kagan. But underneath the surface, there's friction. So tech has a different agenda than product. So tech wants to focus on legacy, and product wants to focus on innovating in a specific customer segment. So you see nods in the room, but stuff is happening in the background. And that leads to failure, because these 2 roles are so important in driving the agenda of the product model and the shift towards the product model. So how to avoid? We'll talk more about that in a bit. But the essence is that you want to make the CTO and the CPO a change leadership team together with other stakeholders from the business. So the CMO or the chief sales officer. So they drive this change together and treat a transformation like a product, not a project, which we'll come to in a bit. And to pattern number 6, losing momentum. So you're losing steam in the transformation. And how do you lose steam? Because as soon as you press the start button on the transformation, the clock starts ticking and the expectations start compounding. And in a transformation, you have believers, you have doubters, believers who are sharing our articles on Slack and YouTube videos. And then you have doubters. Doubters who are like, okay, but isn't this yet another transformation initiative? What will be different? I'm not completely sold if this is good for us. And if you think about this, months go by, 3 months go by, 6 months go by, and if you don't have results to show, the doubters start to surface in meetings, on Slack, and they start to undermine this change. And how to avoid? How do we avoid doubters creating all kinds of ruckus? It's about coaching, right? Coaching the doubters, understanding their needs, and because they might have really valid concerns. They might not understand what this is all about. So it's about empathizing with them. And then transparency, showing off all the good stuff that's happening out there in the teams. And then the most important thing, results, metrics that move, insights gained, and learning that's happening in the teams, because that's going to create excitement. More on that in a bit. And to pattern number 7, forgetting about design and design leadership. So I was a design leader, and I've been a designer for a long time in my career. And designers talk a lot about the table, the seat at the table. And it's so odd that in most product organizations, designers don't have a seat at the table. And I think the most successful companies that I worked with, designers have had a seat at the table. And if you want the product model to really come to fruition, you empower designers and you hire strong design leaders. We'll talk about. And why is this the case that some companies don't value design? Because stakeholders in the business, they think that delivery, this is where the value is, right? The stuff, the technology that's being built, not discovery, doing research and talking to customers, because they already know. They think they know what the customers want. But it's an opinion, not a fact. So, how to avoid? Thinking about the three perspectives on the leadership level, having a head of design, a head of product, and a head of tech joining hands, and creating camaraderie and leading that part of the organization together, and also the change. Anti-pattern number 8. You ready, Andreas? Thea? All right. Going all in at the same time. What does it mean? So some boss says, have you seen this boss before? Maybe you have, or heard this boss. We need a sense of urgency. We need to get this done, right? And this way of thinking is probably quite antiquated. It's from the project model. It's focusing on doing rather than the outcomes. And the boss might say, let's do this change. I want it now. So let's do it on Monday. And then they book this launch, this Teams meeting, and you have Big Co's new operating model. You have senior folks smiling, talking about how we're going to change and why that's important to the company. And they say, on Monday morning, you're all empowered. It's going to be amazing. And then the teams are like, huh? What do you mean? And then they start to doubt themselves, like, can we do this? And then creates stress and a lot of friction in the organization. And how to avoid? By starting small, right? Finding a few pilot teams who are ripe, right? They have the opportunity to try new methods and tools and techniques and work with outcomes rather than just ticking off features in the list. And it's about creating this momentum flywheel, right? You select the teams and then you support them through training and coaching and mentoring so they're set up for success. And then showing results, right? They did customer research. They created some quick prototypes. They launched experiments in production. They got some clear, visible results that this new way of working, cross-functional teams working in discovery and delivery, is creating value. And that creates pull in the organization, right? Other teams become interested, and it's like, this team is working on discovery. That sounds fun. I want to do that too. So it creates pull in the organization and builds momentum. And as a coach, your coaches in the room, so the product managers, the designers, the engineers, your job, what's your job in this change? It's to coach these teams to this moment. Oh, I get it, right? Is this person in the team? We're like, wow, I've reviewed a dashboard, and I think customers are really struggling at this step of the customer journey. Let's talk to the customers. And they understand the value of working cross-functionally. So time to, oh, I get it moment is probably the most important metric for you as a coach, if you're thinking about the term coach in a broader sense. Anti-pattern number 9, leaders not talking enough about the why. Why are we doing this? Why should I care? And this is a story. So you have the panel, right? You've gathered a lot of people in the room, and you're going to talk about this new change that's happening. Maybe the room is filled by middle managers, and the hand goes up. It's a doubter. You know the type. And they say, okay, this sounds interesting, but what does it mean for me? Why is this good for the company? And then the panel, they look at each other, and they're like, what should we say? What? You lost the room. They've lost the room because they couldn't articulate the why in one sentence, right? To explain the value of working in this new way. And I'm surprised by so many companies moving to the product model and doing other transformation work that forget about this essence. Like, why are we doing this? Why will this be better for us in the future? Why should we invest time and effort to upskill people to work in this new way? And how to avoid? It's about connecting this why and how and what, right? What's the essence? And having this product mindset to change that I alluded to earlier. Having a direction, What's the transformation vision? So if you think about 2-3 years from now, what's different? If you walk into the office or in a Teams meeting, what are people talking about that's different than what they're talking about right now? How are they working in a new way? And how is that creating more value and more engagement for them? They should be happier at work because they get closer to customers. They have the opportunity to experiment. But paint that picture. What's the vision? And what's the purpose, the essence, why you're doing that? And then having some clear objectives and how to measure that you're moving in the right direction. And first and foremost, you need to understand your current situation. And then you launch these change initiatives. And what is a change initiative? Just like in product development, right? You have a problem, and then you have a solution idea, and you have success criteria. That's a change initiative. It's a hypothesis. You test and learn, just like you do in product. And then you have this change leadership team with the CPO and the CTO and other business folks joining hands. Maybe I should say, they come together, right? They're a band. And they're responsible for setting up the conditions for success, having transformation objectives, defining the key problems to solve with the transformation, and then launching these potential initiatives. And then governing them. I mean, governance sounds like a boring word, but it's so important that you have someone to steer the direction of the transformation. And these are some examples. So here's the transformation objectives. Product development is slow from upstream to downstream activities. The objective, accelerate time to money or time to value in product development. So key results, decrease the number of dependencies across teams. So that could be the first thing, or increase the number of live experiments across the product organization. I'm sure you come up with better ideas, right? But just having some clear objectives, and then some change initiatives. What could be an example? So here you have a problem. Product decisions are mainly based on gut feeling, right? Might ring a bell. Implement usage dashboards for all product areas with key metrics. And then success criteria. Teams incorporate data-driven insights into demos, right? It's a qualitative way of measuring. Employee engagement survey includes a question on data-driven decision-making and showing a measurable increase in confidence and adoption. Just examples, right? And then you can have a Kanban or another way of kind of visualizing where you are. So you have a backlog, and you have next, you have prepare, in progress, lessons learned, and rollout. So this is the roadmap of transformation and change initiatives. Great. The last one, party people. Antifighter number 10. Leaders talk the talk, but don't walk the walk. You've been there. Like the elephants in the room. You've been in those workshops and meetings. People quote the right things, and they say, like, we're so slow when we don't talk to each other. But behind the scenes, there's like this wait and see mentality in terms of driving change towards the product. So what is the elephant? You want to understand what the elephant is. Because there might be fears, concerns, and doubts relating to this transformation. And you need to address them, because otherwise you see the symptoms. Projects get labeled as strategies, or the team topology changes. So team topology is a fancy term for saying that how are the teams organized, right? And you had some ideas to kind of change things around and to create more alignment across teams, but that gets postponed, and then critical's roles are not prioritized; they're deprioritized. So, how to avoid? Have leaders write down their leadership principles, because they will lead differently in the product model. They're moving from the playing field, like we talked about, right, to the sidelines. They're coaching more, but that's going to mean some unlearning and learning new things as a leader. These are some examples, like coaching over telling, or outcomes over projects, or innovation over predictability. So have the leaders in the organization, or you're the leader in the organization, facilitate a workshop to write down your leadership principles and make them pledge. Call a meeting and all hands say, like, this is the old way of leading. We want to lead in the new way. And these are some principles, and hold us accountable that we're living these principles. All right, folks, now we turn to you. You're the change leader. Björn, David, Andreas, Thea, it's you. Share the story of why you're doing this transformation, the objectives, the current situation, the vision, the purpose, and then start small with some pilot teams and make sure they're set up for success and they have their the coaching and support that they need in order to be successful, to prove that this new way of working, this new model is creating more value. And let the results speak for themselves. Show, don't tell. That's another mistake. Right? We talk a lot, quote the right books, but it's about results, the experiments, the learning, the stuff that's happening out there in the team. So the question to you, what will your first step be from this webinar? What will you do differently?